Cindy Hadge. Cindy is a survivor of tragedies and trauma throughout her life. But today, Cindy has found meaning, purpose, and connection that she has longed for and has made a way of making sense of the senseless that she's lived through while she transforms her tragedies into treasures while holding a safe space for others to heal. And I think that's so, so wonderful as she's promoting that and sharing that with others. Cindy is a lead trainer for the Wildflower Alliance, offering Hearing Voices Network approach trainings, intentional peer support, alternatives to suicide, trauma, and other training. Cindy, we are so, so happy that you're here with us today.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me. It is, I've always wanted to go to Montgomery County ever since I met Berta Blitz and heard about all the work that was being done in your area. And so this is not quite what I was envisioning for coming to Montgomery County, but I am very grateful to be here in this virtual format. And so, yes, gratitude for having me come here. I also have gratitude for IPS because they let me get out of a day of IPS training from Montgomery County that is actually happening right now. And I'm just happy to be here. And I like to start my keynote with this practice of a land acknowledgement. And I may cry in it. Sometimes I do, I might not. But in the spirit of uncovering the hidden truths of this land as people and their collective histories, we want to acknowledge that we are gathered on ancestral grounds of Indigenous people. We do acknowledge that they are not forgotten people, that we see them, hear them, and value them. We offer our respect to their elders, past and present, as well as their emerging leaders as we learn to navigate how best to be humble guests in their lands. In this journey to share truth and reconciliation, we also make room for the histories of those who are brought here against their will or drawn here in the hopes of building better lives, and whose stories are interwoven with the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us all to this virtual place and time. Giving voice to these truths is an essential part of creating mutually respectful relationships and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. And we invite you to join us in this practice by naming these truths. And for me, it's kind of like to know where we are, I have to appreciate how we got here. What's our past? And thank you for letting me share that. And so I was asked to share my story, and I was a kid who came into this world under adverse conditions. If you have an interest, you can always look up the ACE study. I was born into a family that didn't have health insurance, and I was born with a birth defect. I had a bilateral cleft lip and palate. My mother had drank alcohol when she was pregnant with me. My uncle delivered me, and he cried, and he wouldn't let my mother see me. He quote said he thought it would kill her, and he handed me off to my dad, who got me to a hospital. And so right from the get go, my relationship to my mother, was fractured. We didn't get the bond. It took over a month for her to be able to hold me, and I think that kind of set up a tone for our relationship. It was very hard for her. It was a very hard living situation. But in that house, it was a multi-family house. We lived with our grandparents, and in that house, there was a place where I did feel special. I was this funny looking kid. I was not the kid that you pass around and show off to people. Um, but there was somebody who spent time with me who I felt seen and heard by. But unfortunately, that relationship took a turn, and it wasn't a good turn. And in the moment, I could look at them, and the people who I thought saw and heard me, I could look at them and now know I was no longer a person to them, but an object for a desire. And I went to my mom And I said to her, can you just tell them not to do X, Y, and Z because it really hurts. And my mom got very angry, and I didn't understand her anger. I just knew it wasn't great to be around her when she was angry. And she told me, you can never go up there again. And I didn't understand it. And in my little kid mind, I just thought, I've had all these great experiences there, and I had one bad one, and I do want to go back up there. And so one evening, I went up the stairs and I looked up, and this is what I saw. This was my first vision. Represented death to me, and that vision spoke to me stronger than my mother's words. It let me know that if I went up there, I would die. And I can look back on that and say, I don't think I would have really died, but I would have been spiritually wounded. And so I am grateful for that first vision that I had. And then when I was 6, I was unexpectedly in the hospital over Christmas. I had had a bone transplant. They had taken out a rib and they put it on my face so I would have solid hair, but it got infected. And now my parents had insurance, but I had a pre-existing condition, so it wasn't covered. And so I'm on the charity ward at the hospital over Christmas. Lots of kids in these kind of crib cages and a lot of distress. And I had learned at this age not to cry, that it really didn't give me good consequences, but other kids were crying and it created a lot of stress for me. And on Christmas morning, they took the kids that they could out into the hallway. And what other kids saw was a lady in a dress, and behind her were people handing out Christmas presents. And what I saw was an angel, and she had light all around her. And as she got closer to me, I could feel that light. And in that moment, I felt love. I felt goodness, and oh, there is this good energy in the world. And I felt connected to something very big and wonderful without feeling very small. And that belief, or that experience, that was my second vision that I had, was really, really incredibly helpful. But as time passed, I got an angry voice, and it told me that I needed to kill myself or my mother, and I knew I couldn't kill my mother. That was not a thing I could do. And I felt guilty. And the relationship between my mother and I was getting worse as her drinking was getting worse. And at this point, I began to self-injure just to quiet that voice. And when I turned 12, the voice had gotten bigger and bigger. And I would go to school and I would hope that people could just look in my eyes and know what was going on in my house. And I didn't talk about it. In my family, it just seemed like it was scary or dangerous. The family secrets, don't tell, don't feel, and just try to be good. And so I had this experience with my mother that she had hit me, and I ran away. And as I'm running away, I have this voice screaming at me that I have to pick. I get to my room and I realize, my mom will have something in her hand. What will I have in my hand? And I pick up this book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And it's the story of what happened to the indigenous people in this country, and how they were basically decimated. And in there was this story called The Trail of Tears. And that story resonated with me. I felt like I was on the Trail of Tears. And my mom came in, and I told her, if you hit me, I'll hit you back twice as hard. And I did. And it totally changed our relationship. She, only hit me twice again in her life, and not very hard. But I had a lot of shame and guilt about that. Decades later, I'm in counseling, and a therapist says to me, that's how it works. I'm like, what do you mean that's how it works? And she said, that's when kids quit getting hit, when they get big enough to hit back. And I was like, that's a thing? And she said, yes. And when she told me that, she removed the shame and guilt from me. It was a very healing exchange for me. Also at 12, I went to my dad And because there were times he interceded on my behalf, and my dad ended up, literally and figuratively crushing me. And in that moment, I kind of lost my belief in love in the world. I thought perhaps I'm just not made for this world, or maybe there is good in the world, but I don't qualify for it. And so my solution was I blamed myself for what others did to me. And my solution was to try not to think, feel, or remember. And it was less scary to think that if I could have been just good enough, things would have been okay, than to think about that the people in charge of my care just weren't safe people. And so this process of drinking and drugging and trying to be somebody else sort of worked, and then it really didn't work. And this is a picture of a place I was staying at one point, and it hit me, what a sad state of affairs. And I took a picture, and I was staying in a boathouse, a house for boats, and and I had to be grateful that I had shelter. And at the same time, I was like, how can this be right? How can it be right that people can build houses for boats and not for people? It was a very mixed feeling for me. And eventually, I got a year of clean and sober, and people would say, aren't you happy? And I would say, no, I have nightmares. I have feelings. I don't know what to do with them. And I ended up in the mental health system. And initially, I liked what they said. And what they said to me is, don't worry, we just have to get you on the right cocktail, which I thought was funny. And I also thought it was consistent with my values or my beliefs. If you put the right drug in me, life could be livable. And so I kind of liked that message. And what happened was I would say, if one was good, one pill was good, maybe three would be better. And I still have nightmares. And basically, I wanted to be on more medication because I didn't want to feel and I didn't want to remember. And and eventually, I ended up on Thorazine. The bad part for me when I went into services, was that some of those messages from trauma got repeated. As a kid, I was told, don't tell or someone will get hurt. They used to always say to me, don't tell, it will kill your mother, like it would be my fault if I told her the truth and she was upset about it. And then that got repeated in the mental health system when I was learned that if I talked about what was really going on for me, I could get locked up. Um, and these messages that, people won't believe you, they'll say your experiences aren't real, um, and so forth and so on. And this weird thing about gratitude, I can remember my dad telling me, I should be grateful that I have it this good, and nobody else would want me and all that stuff. And when I got this very serious mental health diagnosis, I was told, you're gonna be in and out of the hospital your whole life. Be grateful for times you're not, and you'll be on medication your whole life. And and so I just felt like I was hearing the same thing. And so the result was, sometimes services can echo the past trauma rather than addressing it. That the feelings of powerlessness, shame, guilt, silencing, impending doom. Even if things were going well, I was always expecting the bad thing to happen. And this last one about sometimes, capitulation to authority. And what I mean by that was that as a kid, there were times I would do things that I thought were wrong, but I thought, I will survive this situation in a better state if I go along with it. If I can just make him happy, then maybe I won't be so injured. And sometimes when facing forced commitment, and people would say, well, if you sign yourself in, which I didn't really agree with, but I thought, well, that'll be a lot better than getting handcuffed and, brought to the hospital that way, and I would do it. So those feelings of dishonoring myself and shame and guilt just kind of got bigger. And I got to this place where, I was being told I had an outreach worker come to my house and tell me how wonderful I was doing. And I said, I have no life. I sit on my sofa, I smoke cigarettes, watch TV, drink coffee, and I do nothing. And she said, yes, but you're not getting into any trouble. And in that moment, I thought about suicide. But then I also remember that 12 step peer support in the form of 12 step had helped me out in my life. I thought, is there something like that for what I'm going through? And I put in my internet search, peer support and mental health. And I found out this the most amazing thing was that I lived within walking distance of the Wildflower Alliance. And I could go in there and be treated like a person versus a mental patient. I could have what I call normal conversations. I was allowed to have feelings without having them pathologized. And people had curiosity about the context of my experience. And many of these things that mitigate trauma were present there. I was seen and heard, and I was told to become an expert on my experience, that there was something I could do, that there were things I could try. I can remember the director there would send me text messages or emails saying, I saw this and I was thinking of you. Would you like to try this? And I would always say no. And then eventually she said to me, why do you always say no? And I said, my experience is that if I say I like something, it ends up in my treatment plan. And what if I only like yoga 3 times? And I don't want to do it anymore. And then I'm seen as being a quitter or being bad or non-compliant. And what she said to me is, why don't you try something and see if you like it? And if you do, great. And if you don't, that's okay. But how are you going to find out what works for you if you don't try things? And it was like this whole different concept to me. And I said, you mean I could actually sign up for something and then decide I don't like it? It'll be okay. And she's like, yes. And I had one of those experiences. There's this wonderful person from the UK, Peter Bullimore, who does this training on a mastric interview. It's a way of working with voice hearers. And I signed up for it. And I went one day and I said, I am not going back to that. And she said, this just wasn't the time for you to take it. Maybe there'll be a different point in your life where it makes sense. And 3 years later, I took it and I was really glad I did. So I really love this idea of, taking personal responsibility and figuring out what works for me, which means my recovery isn't flat. It can be bumpy. And that's okay because every time, I hit a bump, I learn something from it. And, that organization also offered hearing voices groups. And you know what? If I was in Montgomery County, I could have found a hearing voices group. But between Montgomery County and Western Massachusetts and the US, there just weren't many. So you guys are so blessed to live in an area where there are also hearing voices groups. And what happened for me was I went to those groups and people are sitting in sofas and chairs in a circle, and I wouldn't even sit in the circle. I would sit in a chair behind the circle. I would say nothing because I had a hard time believing that it was okay to talk about these things, that you wouldn't end up in the hospital. And people did this amazing thing. They thanked me for coming, and I'm like, oh, these people are weird. They're happy to see me. I'm not happy to see me. Why are they happy to see me? And eventually, I said to somebody, "Why do you thank me for coming? I don't say anything." And what they told me was, "You bear witness." You bear witness to other people's stories. And I really want to say that it's such an important value that, whether I'm in a space where I can talk or not, I'm still a person in here and I'm listening. And the fact that you're acknowledging my existence is part of a healing process for me. And it took me 6 months to to finally say something there. And what I did was I went, "Blah, blah, 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 this is how screwed up I am." And what they said to me was, "Well, you're still on the planet. You must have something going for you. How is it that you're still here?" And so they pointed out a vision of myself that was not based on disorder or illness, but was based on you survived and you're still here. And we believe, and they believed it a lot sooner than I did, that there are possibilities for me. And they didn't believe in lost causes, which, I felt like I was pretty much a lost cause after 25 years in the mental health system. And I, you know, and I learned how to have relationships. I learned that you can have conflict without anybody getting hit. And that, in fact, conflict and debate and discussion can actually bring people closer together. And this whole idea of, they didn't know what would work for me, but they were going to put out possibilities and resources to me. And it was up to me to figure out what worked for me. And so that was really incredibly, if anything changed my life or gave me a life, it was these values. And there were times when I was unpacking, what was my voice hearing experience? How did it relate to the things that I've been through? How was it related to trauma, or what beliefs do I have and where did I get those beliefs? And are they accurate? And sometimes in that process, I would get discouraged, sad, or I would say, why did it have to be that way? Why is it that way? And at those moments, I could get support. These alternatives to suicide groups. Again, I'm so happy to be in Montgomery County. You guys have alternatives to suicide groups. You guys are offering stuff to people who are in places like me. You're offering a place for people to heal. And so instead of going to crisis and having people ask me, do I have a plan? Do I have the ways and means? Instead, they would ask me, why? What is it that you want to change? What is hard in your life? What's making it seem like suicide would be a solution to a problem? What actually is the problem? And why not? You're here talking to us. So I think that maybe you're trying to look for a different answer. What are the things that keep you tied to the planet? And so that also was life changing. And then at a point in my journey, I had slowly, fortunately, with a wonderful psychiatrist who believed in neuroplasticity, believed in healing, believed that I could, that what I had done was adapted to a situation. And now I could adapt to a new situation. I could learn new ways of thinking and being in the world. And he has supported me to come off all the psych drugs, which was amazing. And I didn't know if it would work. I just wanted to see. But I had come to this place where I had hit a bump in the road. And I just, and people were, my therapist wanted to commit me because I was struggling. And I didn't know if I could get through this difficult time, but I wanted to try. And so I was so fortunate because part of our community is a FIA, a peer-run respite. And I have to stop screen share for a second and then redo it because I'm going to show you a short video. And I think the character in the video is more fun to watch than me. And so I can figure it out.
Afia House opened on August 4th, 2012 in Northampton, Massachusetts. The house is intended to provide an alternative to hospitalization for individuals who are experiencing emotional and/or mental distress and who feel they would benefit from staying in a community-based environment. There are many paths that end up bringing one through AFIA's doors for respite. We'd like to share one such journey with you.
So I was at this point of facing involuntary commitment, and I had slowly got off my medication, and things had gone well for a while, but now I was hitting a bumpy spot. And the bumpy spot was getting tougher and tougher, and my service providers were like, you know, we've given you a while, things aren't getting better, we think you need to go back to the hospital. So at one point, when I was getting the ultimatum, I just ran and hid in the woods. And things were not getting better. And I really wanted to have a chance to see if I could go through this extreme state without going to the hospital, because when I've gone to the hospital, not only did I have to recover from that extreme state, I had to recover from the trauma of having been in the hospital. I didn't know if it would work, but I wanted the chance to see if I could try a different way to get through this experience. And I was able to go to AFIA and be in my extreme state and sleep odd hours and, be able to have a coherent conversation and not be able to have a coherent conversation. And what I discovered was that I could go through an extreme state without being extremely medicated. And it really forced me to try to look at different strategies. When I went there, people said, what can we do to help you? And that kind of freaked me out, because normally people would say, this is what you need to do. We'll put you on this medication, da, 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 da. And instead, I had to experiment and see what was helpful for me. And I learned a lot about how to manage those experiences in a more self-directed way. We worked out this thing at AFIA where each of my kids came, and the people working there were able to sit and talk with us, and I didn't feel like people were on two different sides. It wasn't about, how to make Marty compliant. It was more like how to make this work, and what does everybody in this group need? And we were able to negotiate that, and that was something that had never happened in the past.
AFIA House opened on August 4th, 2012 in Northampton, Massachusetts. The house is intended to provide an alternative to hospitalization for individuals who are experiencing emotional and/or mental distress and who feel they would benefit from staying in a community-based environment. There are many paths that end up bringing one through AFIA's doors for respite. We'd like to share one such journey with you.
And so anyways, AFIA gave me that chance to try to figure it out. This thing happened where I decided my solution was to live as a man, because that way I would feel safe in the world, and people in my community accepted that. It was really important, and I thought that was my solution. And what it was just one more step in my journey, because this amazing thing happened was that as I lived as Marty, I began to heal the little girl in me. And now I'm at this place where I no longer blame her for what happened, and I'm embracing that identity. But I just really wanted to put this out there, please respect people and how they identify. It may be part of their healing process. And, everybody has a different story, and it really helped me to get to a place where I can embrace myself. But it was a step in the process, and I'm just hoping people can respect people for that. And so transformation. So this amazing thing, that if I got harmed in relationships, I can also be healed in them. And finding meaning, purpose, and connection, and trust and love. And also this whole thing about having rights, roles, and responsibilities, and resources and relationships. And I know it's incredibly hard. It's been hard, at least for me, during COVID, to find all that or to keep all that. When we were on initial lockdown, I had this feeling in me that I used to feel when I would be in seclusion for days. That feeling of not being connected to anything or anyone. And then I could remind myself that, you know, this may remind me of that time, but it is not that time. I have kitchen privileges. I can go outside. I can pick up a phone. I can go on Zoom. I can get fresh air, which were all things I couldn't do in the hospital. So even though a little piece of it reminded me of that there were things I could do. There were things I could do to stay connected. And in the midst of this pandemic, you know, I've been able to meet people all over the world and talk to them on a weekly basis. So there is something that you know, with adaptation, with new strategies, you know, I can maintain meaning, purpose, and connection. And this slide is you know, the first thing I got to do, I think I was still on Haldol, but the first thing I got to do was to do a keynote at Alternatives in Texas. And I went to my therapist and she said, don't go to Texas. You'll get locked up down there. We'll never get you back. And I went to my kids and they said, don't go to Texas. You're too weird. They'll just kill you in Texas. And I went to the people who asked me to go to this thing. And what they did was they gave me instead of a fear-based response, a possibility-based response. And what they said was, what do you need to go? What are the supports you need? And I said, I need a crew. And I went with 8 other people and I did have a hard time coming back, but I wasn't judged. Instead, I had a team supporting me getting back. It was amazing. I got to go to the Hearing Voices Congress in Boston, and that's Paul Baker. And when Paul Baker first met me, I didn't talk, and Paul and I actually could have a conversation. He's one of the people who helped develop the Hearing Voices Network, and he joked with me and he said, you know, maybe I liked you better when you didn't talk. And he's a really great friend. And I got to go back to the hospital where I would frequently be locked up in, and we gave a training to the whole emergency department, including the security force, who all showed up in uniform, which initially gave me some pause. And I was sitting next to our director of mental health, and she said to me, do you have coping skills? I said, yes. I'm gonna go illegally smoke on hospital property and I will be right back and it'll all be good. And I got to thank these people who didn't necessarily follow the rules. Like they allowed me to walk onto the psychiatric unit instead of coming on the unit in a stretcher. There were people who were willing to hold my hand. That male officer, he said, everybody has a story. You know, if I listen to somebody's story, you know, our interaction goes much better. And so it was really neat. This guy in the corner down there, the tall one, you know, I told him my story about the angel, and he said to me, don't let anybody rob that from you by calling it a delusion. And he's a man who I could send my angry voices to. I could text them to him, and he would text those voices back. And he held out this belief that life could get better for me. You know, even when I would lose it, he would say, no, you know, I believe you can recover. I believe you can recover. I don't believe, he would say, I don't believe you're schizophrenic. I believe you're somebody who had a lot of trauma and you can heal. And he really modeled what a healthy, loving relationship would be. This is my oldest daughter. When she turned 12, I quit being able to hug her or touch her because it created such discomfort in my body. And at the time, I didn't understand why until decades later. And now my living amends to her is I have to hug her every time I see her. And this is them practicing support for me. We're doing our gender non-conforming picture together. You know, I have children who love me. And this funny thing where I had this opportunity to go to the Netherlands to meet Marius Rome, one of the founders of the Hearing Voices movement. And my boss calls me up and says, "Do you want to go to Amsterdam?" And I said, "It's not on my list of places to go." Because like all I can think of is legalized drugs. And she said, "Well, I have money to send you, do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, yeah, if I get to meet Marius, yeah, I do want to go." And she goes, "But this is the thing, you have to travel alone." And so I thought, oh, that is different. That is different. But I said, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I am gonna do it. And so yes, I traveled to another country all alone and I made it back and I didn't fall apart. And when I needed support at this Hearing Voices Congress, I had friends. I had my support network. I'm no longer isolated or alone. And this final picture is the taller girl is my granddaughter. And she came, this is the summer, she came in and she's 12. And that horrible feeling came up in me. And I said, "Oh, I know that feeling." And what I said to myself is, trauma can inform me, but it doesn't have to define me. And I could give her a big hug and all was well. And we had just this wonderful conversation where she talked to me like a young adult about what are her future plans. And it's just awesome. And I am so grateful to you guys and the work you do and the idea that people can heal. Our bodies can heal, our minds can heal, and sometimes, in some points in my life I didn't know that. But other people knew that and they reminded me of that. And so thank you so much for letting me share. And I do believe the sun is coming out. I do believe that we will see each other in person. And thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this. I want to come back in person. I want to see Berta. I want to do I've been doing a number of trainings in Montgomery County, but I actually want to go there sometime.
Oh, wow. Cindy, I'm not often, we have not gotten to meet in person. I'm not often at a loss for words, but your story, I want